The Robert H. Jackson Center was designed to advance the legacy of Justice Robert H. Jackson through education, exhibitry, and for an opportunity to make sure the community, and this can be an international community, know what it is, the accomplishments of Justice Jackson and its relevancy today.
The Chief Prosecutor for the United States of America.
The privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. That four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason.
Well, Justice Jackson will always be a hero to me, of course. I think that he's just a truly brilliant, dedicated, honest leader of men. I think that Justice Jackson has to go down as possibly the finest legal writer of the last century. I mean, his composition is incredible. He talked about, did we help him in his speeches? He didn't need any help with his speeches. As far as phraseology is concerned, as far as, he's just an absolute master.
It is against such a background that these defendants now ask this tribunal to say that they are not guilty of planning, executing, or conspiring to commit this long list of crimes and wrongs. They stand before the record of this tribunal as blood-stained Gloucester stood by the body of his slain king. He begged of the widow, as they beg of you, say I slew them not. And the queen replied, then say they were not slain, but dead they are. If you were to say of these men that they are not guilty, it would be as true to say that there has been no war, that there are no slain, that there has been no crime.
As Jackson put it, the evidence is there with such authenticity and in such detail that there can be no responsible denial of these crimes in the future, and no tradition of martyrdom of the Nazi leaders can arise among informed people. And he hoped to create a precedent that would make explicit that to persecute, oppress, and do violence to individuals or to minorities on political, racial, or religious grounds is an international crime. Today, 50-plus years later, the world is again witnessing an attempt to apply that precedent in new war crimes proceedings in Brussels and in Rwanda, to serve again as the voice of human decency following the unspeakable atrocities in Rwanda and in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We're following the path beaten by Robert Jackson for the protection of basic human liberties.
I want to thank you, Ben, for inviting me here. I think that perpetuating the legacy of Justice Robert Jackson is a tremendous thing that you're doing. It's so important that people it's so easy for new young generation, so many years removed from that experience to, in a sense, feel it never happened. There are even some people around the world who claim it's a Jewish plot to invent the Holocaust, and it never happened. And here we know that it did, and I think we owe a great debt to Justice Jackson. He really persevered with us. He fought for it. He fought for it against really the Allies, who were very reluctant to go along with a prolonged, carefully planned, totally legitimate legal trial. And so I want to thank you very much for inviting me. Okay.
I don't think you can be a lawyer or, before that, a law student without running into the words of Justice Robert Jackson and finding something there that's very powerful. He was, by all accounts, the best or one of the top few writers in the history of the Supreme Court, and his opinions convey that in a very powerful and direct, informal writing style. So it was first his words as a Supreme Court justice, and then as I began to work first as a prosecutor and then as a legal academic, I found that the paths I was interested in kept crossing the paths of this man's life, and it didn't take me long to figure out that he really was, from my view, a central figure of his time, of his century, and that his time is his project, his contribution is much bigger than the 13 years he served on the U.S. Supreme Court. It really is a story of, I think somewhat the history of this country. A farm boy, a public servant, part of the inner circle during the New Deal, the creation of modern government as we know it, part of the creation of modern constitutional law as we know it, and part of the creation of the international legal order as we know it through his work at Nuremberg. So all of that grabbed me very powerfully.
When Roosevelt elevated Harlan Stone to the Chief Justice in 1941, he appointed Jackson as Associate Justice. But what strikes me most about his court work was his masterful use of the English language. What makes this mastery truly impressive is the fact that Jackson had no formal education beyond high school, except a year at the Albany Law School. And certainly law schools are not places known for their teachers of great English prose style.
Now that you've had a chance maybe to think about or maybe learn about Robert Jackson, do you have any reaction, any reflection on him?
Robert Jackson is another person that I feel that was involved in would be like my attorneys I worked with.
Oh, so you think of him as part of your team,
Right.
don't you?
Right.
Presidential power, he said, is divided into three kinds. The first was where the president acted pursuant to congressional delegation of authority. Here, presidential power was at its apex. The president had not only the power of the executive, but the power of the legislature behind him. And only if the act was beyond the authority of the federal government itself would a presidential act be struck down. The second case was where the president acts in the absence of any congressional expression on the subject, one way or the other. There he has the power of the executive, but not that of Congress behind him. The third is presidential power at its nadir, when the president takes measures to deal with a situation in a particular way, where Congress has said that it should be dealt with in a different way. This, in Jackson's view, was the situation in the Steele seizure case, and that was why he joined in ruling the seizure unconstitutional. Although no one else on the court joined Jackson's opinion at the time, the court has since cited it as governing law.
Is the Jackson jurisprudence? Is there a sense of that at all on the court?
Oh yeah.
From your perspective?
Well, in the Hamdan case, the case that came down in June that shot down the military commissions that the Bush administration wanted to use to try the Guantanamo detainees, Justice Kennedy's concurring opinion cites Youngstown, extensively to say, I guess he says, this is category 3 where Congress has set up a system, and this is not that. Not only has Congress not authorized this, it's not just a question of congressional silence, but Congress has set up a system for trials of enemy combatants, and it's not this system, and so this has to fall. So yeah, I think Justice Jackson's legacy is very much alive, and of course Chief Justice Roberts, who clerked for Chief Justice Rehnquist, who clerked for Justice Jackson, I think sees himself in that line of descent, and Jackson's name came up during the confirmation hearings for Roberts, and so yeah, that's living history, very definitely.
It's a lesson, especially for students. Say, gee, I could never be a justice of the Supreme Court. I could never be a chief prosecutor of an international tribunal, or I could never be a solicitor general or attorney general. The reality is anybody can, if you have the right passion, the right interest, and Jackson is one of those personal role models.
Be proud that you could count among your citizens one of the finest lawyers and judges ever to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States. One who took his talents to the world stage at Nuremberg to help to make life better for people throughout the world. Why did I call his biography America's Advocate? Because he advocated the standards that America at its best stands for. He provides all of us with a splendid standard with which we can return again and again for inspiration. You are building here in Jamestown a permanent shrine to keep those inspiring memories alive. You are erecting a standard here in Jamestown to which lawyers and others can return again and again for inspiration now and in the future. May God crown your work with success.
Surely Jamestown and Chautauqua County can be proud of the career of their native son on both the national and the international scene. Thank you.
I am very, very surprised, flattered, and proud to be here and to have discovered over these recent years this wonderful agency, center. Greg Peterson has literally brought Robert Jackson to the attention of the American people in a way that should have been done a long time ago. Suddenly found myself surrounded by a lot of very nice and very informed people. People who patronize this place, people who support it, and by the way, that's a pretty important thing. But you can't do good stuff without it. And for all those, and what a magic job Greg has done to excite not only a community, but some very, very important people, not only in the law, but in political, public life as well. Let's support Greg, and he knows I'm a big fan of his. This is very much alive. This place has got a spirit. I love coming here, and I promise you I'll be back.
When Phil Donahue was at the Jackson Center a few months ago, and he spoke eloquently about some of these cases, he focused on the Jehovah's Witness case, West Virginia Board of Education versus the Barnett sisters. And Phil Donahue quoted Justice Jackson, and we have to hang on to something, and he called it a fixed star. That's it. You got to hang on to something. A fixed star in our constitutional constellation, and I thought, well, I'm gonna memorize it like Phil did because it's so profound. And with your permission, I'd like to sing it as well. I got a piano here. If there is any fixed star, if there is any fixed star, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, or religion, or any matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or by act their faith therein. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the Robert Jackson Center. Thank you very much, my friends, indeed.